Drusilla Russell flinched so hard when Brant Keller reached for her coat that he stopped with both hands in the air. He waited for her small nod, touched only the loose wool at her shoulders, wrapped it higher against the snow, and stepped back. By spring, Drusilla would have to decide whether the first man who let her walk away was the one she could finally ask to stay. The porch boards of cottonwood trail posts were whitening at the edges. Wind came hard across the yard, carrying loose snow past the stable and around the legs of two tied horses. Drusilla stood one step below Brant with a canvas parcel tucked against her ribs and the right side of her brown wool coat blown half off her shoulder. He had come up from the yard at the same moment she came out. Reaching for the loose collar had been as thoughtless as catching a dropped rain. Her reaction was not. She folded inward before his glove ever touched her. One hand seized the coat at her breast. Her face turned away. The movement was so quick that Brant's own body went still before his mind had caught up. He kept his hands where she could see them. Want the collar closed. Her eyes came back to him, then to his hands. For a moment, the only sound between them was the wind rattling a loose strip of leather on the hitching rail. Brant did not step nearer. At last, she gave a short nod. He took the coat by the cloth alone. He drew the heavy wool up along her shoulders, folded the loose side across enough to stop the wind, then let go at once. His gloves never touched her neck or arm. He moved aside until there was clear space between her and the steps. Drusilla stayed where she was for one breath longer. She looked at him, as if waiting for the rest of the bargain. There was none. Brant bent, lifted the saddlebags he had set by the porch post, and nodded toward the yard. Stable paths, slick by the water trough. Her mouth tightened, not quite a smile. She went down the steps on her own parcel, still in her arms. He watched only long enough to see her boots find the packed strip of snow beside the rail. Then he went inside. The post smelled of wood smoke, wet wool coffee, and horses whenever the back door opened. It sat on the Mountain Branch Road between Fort Union and Las Vegas, too small to be called a town and too useful to be ignored. A stage might leave it noisy with 20 people for an hour and nearly empty again by sundown. Freight wagons stopped for feed. Ranch hands came for lamp oil flour, tack repairs, and whatever else winter had worn through. Brant's work took him there twice most weeks. Wendell Edwards kept cattle on broken country west of the road, and Brant rode the winter line, checking drifted stock and watching water where ice gathered thick in shaded cuts. Before dawn, when the weather allowed, he also worked 6 young horses Wendell meant to judge before spring. Brant wanted the remuda on the first cattle move north. He had not told anyone that except Wendell, and even then he had said it like a man naming a task rather than a hope. He trusted horses better than promises. A horse told the truth eventually. Drusilla proved harder to read. For the next 2 weeks, he learned only what she let the room show him. In the morning, she helped her aunt, Olive Osborne, at the counter, and in the kitchen when stages were due. When the rush passed, she moved to a scarred table by the rear window where she cut canvas wool and lining for coats worn by men who spent more time outdoors than they did under roofs. She did not waste motion. She marked seams with chalk, held pins between her lips when both hands were busy, and had a look for anyone who leaned on cut cloth as if it were firewood. The first time Brant heard her laugh, it was because of Miller from the Pacheco place. Miller stood beside the work table with both arms stretched straight out while Drusilla measured his shoulders. He looked like a fence post someone had dressed in a shirt. Brant had just come in from sleet and was warming one hand around a tin cup. "You can bend your elbows, Miller." Miller glanced at him. "She told me to hold still." "Still ain't the same as dead." Brant took a drink. Most men don't discover they own elbows until somebody has to fit a sleeve over them. Drusilla laughed before she could stop herself. It was not loud. It was better than loud. It changed her whole face for a second. Then she pressed her lips together and went back to the tape around Miller's shoulder, as if Brant had caught her neglecting serious business. He kept his eyes on his coffee. Afterward, when Miller had gone, Drusilla asked, "Do coat hems catch much in greasewood when a man rides low?" Brant looked over. "Depends where he wears them." She waited. He set down the cup and showed her with one hand where the cloth dragged when a rider leaned from the saddle. He did not tell her how to sew it. He told her where the wear came. She asked 2 more questions. That was all. On his next supply day, he found himself pushing the sorrel a little faster over the last mile, then checked the horse and swore under his breath. There was no sense arriving early enough to make a good animal sweat, just because a woman might be sitting by a window. He arrived early anyway, though not by much. Drusilla was there. That became the shape of February before either of them named it. He came when his route gave him reason. She sometimes looked up before the door had shut behind him. He noticed whether the chair at her table was occupied. She noticed whether mud had dried white on his boots or ice had crusted his scarf. They spoke mostly of work. A lined cuff that turned sleet better, a roan gelding that mouthed the bit when asked to stand, a stage team that came in blowing hard after a bad stretch of road. Ordinary things. Brant liked that she listened to an answer without using it as an excuse to keep him talking. He liked more that when she wanted to keep him talking, she simply asked another question. The trouble came with a freight bill tucked among the stage mail early in February. Brant was at the far end of the counter counting cartridges for the ranch when Olive opened the folded paper and frowned. "I can't put more wool on my account until the next settlement comes through," she said. Drusilla's chalk stopped over a paper pattern. Olive rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Flour and feed have to come first. I need 2 bolts before the middle of the month." "I know." Olive's answer was tired, not cruel. "I still can't promise them." Brant kept counting. It was none of his concern unless someone made it his concern. The next day, Wendell Edwards came in with snow dried on his coat and 3 names in his head. "I need lined coats for 3 men," he told Olive. 4 if Perez tears that sleeve again. Your place can handle it before month's end. Olive glanced toward Drusilla's table. Wendell followed the look. "Your niece's work holds up." Brant saw Drusilla's hand flatten on the cloth. Not hard, just flat. Olive started to answer for the post. Before she finished, a stage rolled in, and the room filled at once with boots, steam voices, and the scrape of benches. Olive called for Drusilla to help serve the noon meal. Drusilla folded the pattern away. By the time Brant went to saddle his horse, she was carrying split pine from the back stack, 2 pieces braced against her hip, and another tucked under one arm. He tightened his cinch and watched her make a second trip. She did not look helpless. That was not what bothered him. She looked practiced. "Which part of the week are you trying hardest not to lose?" he asked. Drusilla stopped beside the wood box. "Aunt Olive needs the counter when the stage comes through." "I didn't ask what Olive needs." Her eyes sharpened on him. Brant rested one forearm on the saddle. He had no speech prepared. He only knew the answer she had given was not an answer about herself. The wind lifted a strand of hair from her cheek. "Tuesday and Thursday afternoons," she said at last. "I want those for sewing." He waited. "And I want one order that is mine. Not work I do under the post account. Mine." There it was, plain enough to stand in the cold without decoration. Brant nodded once. "Then Olive needs to hear it from you." Drusilla's chin came up. "That all you have to say? You did the hard part already." "What hard part?" Answering the question I asked. Her expression shifted. Not amusement, not quite annoyance either. Brant put his boot in the stirrup. "See you Tuesday." That evening he stayed at the post long enough to eat before riding to the Edwards bunkhouse. Olive and Drusilla stood behind the counter while he finished his plate at the end of the common table. He made a point of looking at his food. "I'll cover mornings," Drusilla said. Her voice carried because the room was nearly empty. "And I'll help when a stage comes in crowded. But Tuesday and Thursday after dinner, I'm sewing unless someone is sick or stranded." Olive was silent long enough for Brant to hear the stove tick. "We've always managed together. We still will. That room and those travelers don't care what day it is." "No, but I do." Brant looked down at his plate so Olive would not catch him listening. After another pause, Olive said, "Then keep those afternoons. Just don't leave me alone with 40 plates if the stage breaks an axle outside the door." Drusilla let out a breath. "I won't." No one declared victory. Olive stacked cups. Drusilla carried a basin toward the kitchen. Brant finished his supper and kept the small satisfaction to himself. The next morning, Drusilla came into the yard while he was checking a strap on his saddle. She carried a canvas-wrapped bundle against her chest. "You're going to Edwards' place." "I generally do when I'm riding that direction." She ignored the dry edge of the answer. "Will you carry this?" Brant looked at the bundle, then at her. "One sample coat," she said. "Nothing else." "You hand it to Mr. Edwards. You tell him I made it. You do not tell him a price for me, and you do not promise when I can finish more." The limits were so exact that he nearly smiled. "Nearly. One coat. Your name. No price. No date. Yes? That's all, that is all." He took the parcel from her. For one brief instant, her fingers stayed on the canvas after his closed around it. Then she released it without apology or thanks, large enough to turn the favor into a debt. Brant liked that more than he should have. At Edwards's place, Wendell opened the parcel on the bunkhouse table and ran a thumb along the stitching. "Olive's girl does good work." "Drusilla Russell." Wendell looked up. "She made it," Brant said. "If you want more, you settle with her." Wendell turned the coat over. "I'll take 4. She'll need cloth money. Then send an advance in cash." Wendell grunted, pulled coins from the ranch lockbox, and counted enough for the first materials. Brant said nothing about price or delivery. He wrapped the money in a scrap of paper and tucked it into his inside pocket. 2 days later, he placed it on Drusilla's cutting table. "From Wendell. He wants 4. You tell him the rest." She looked at the packet, but did not touch it at first. "You didn't bargain, no. Promise a date? No. Tell him he was a fool if he didn't order 6, Brant considered. That would have been useful advice. Her mouth twitched. He pushed the packet half an inch toward her. Still didn't give it. She counted the money, folded the paper over it again, and put it in the small wooden box where she kept thread chalk and receipts. Her hands were steady until the lid closed. Then one thumb pressed against the edge of the box for a second longer than necessary. Brant pretended not to notice. The freight wagons moved on before dark, leaving the post quiet enough to hear the wind under the eaves. Brant had his hat on, and one glove pulled tight when Drusilla spoke from the rear window. "Brant." He turned. She pointed with her shears to the narrow chair beside her table. "If no horse is dying because you're standing indoors, you can sit there while I finish this seam." There was no parcel to carry, no question about fabric, no stage expected. Brant's hand stopped on his second glove. For several days he had caught himself wanting a reason to remain in that room. Now she had given him one that was not a reason at all. He took off his hat. "Which chair?" "The one I pointed at." "I wanted to be certain." "Your work rules appear exact." "They are becoming more exact every day." He sat. For a while neither spoke. Drusilla sewed by lamplight. Brant watched the needle disappear through dark wool and return with a faint pull of thread. The room smelled of cloth iron heat and the cold that had followed him in on his coat. The silence was not empty. He had known empty silences. This one had a place for him in it. He shifted his boot and touched the table leg. Drusilla looked up at once. "If that cloth lands on the floor, you sweep it." Brant went perfectly still. "I'll stop breathing until you finish." That earned him the smallest smile. He did not add another joke. He sat where she had put him until the seam was done. When she clipped the thread, Brant rose and set his hat on his head. He could have left it there. He almost did. Saying what a horse needed had always been easier than saying what he wanted. But he was tired of arriving early and pretending it was because of coffee. "I finish the young horses before dinner. On Sundays," he said. "If you're willin', I'd like to call on you this Sunday." Her hand stilled on the folded coat. "For yourself?" she asked. "For myself. No parcel? Not unless I lose my nerve and hide behind one." A brief laugh escaped her. Then her face softened. "I'd like you to come." Brant rode back to the ranch with the night cold cutting at his cheeks and the peculiar knowledge that Sunday had become a day he could fail to deserve, simply by not showing up. The next week tested both of them before Sunday had much chance to become a habit. A crowded stage arrived near noon with a broken trace and passengers already irritated by the delay. Olive worked from stove to counter without stopping. By mid-afternoon, when Drusilla turned toward her sewing table, Olive said too sharply, "Must those coats come before your own family today?" Brant was standing near the door with a coil of rope Wendell had sent him to collect. He saw Drusilla stop. Before she could answer, Wendell came in from the yard. "Keller, when's my first coat ready?" Brant's answer rose to his tongue on instinct. He knew the date. He knew why the cloth had come late. He could have made the whole matter easier in 10 words. Drusilla was holding a folded length of lining against her waist. He closed his mouth. She looked at Olive first. "I'll wash the supper dishes and help with the late coach if it comes, but this is Thursday." We agreed. Olive's tired face tightened. Then she gave a reluctant nod and turned back to the stove. Drusilla faced Wendell. "Your first coat is due a week from Monday, Mr. Edwards. If you want to ask about the work, ask me." Wendell blinked. "I thought Keller was carrying messages." He carried one coat. Brant leaned one shoulder against the wall. Wendell glanced at him, then back at Drusilla. "A week from Monday, then?" "Yes." "Fair enough?" He tipped his hat and went out again. When Olive disappeared into the kitchen, Drusilla stood very still. The lining in her arms had creased under her fingers. Brant waited until she loosened her grip. "You didn't say anything," she said. "Wasn't my delivery date." Her eyes dropped to the cloth. For several seconds, she seemed to weigh whether to continue. "At the place where I worked before I came here," she said, "men had a habit of taking hold of an arm when they wanted a woman moved, into a room, out of one, away from a customer. It did not matter much whether she had finished what she was doing. Brant felt something cold settle behind his ribs that had nothing to do with February. He kept his face quiet. Drusilla looked up. "That first day on the porch, you stopped before you touched me." He did not tell her he would never frighten her. A man could promise too much with very fine words and prove very little. "I'll ask before I reach," he said. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. Then, to his surprise, she asked, "What do you want?" Brant frowned. "Now in spring. You keep riding those young horses before dawn. Mr. Edwards watches you whenever one comes through the yard." "What are you after?" He looked toward the window. One of the stage horses shook its harness outside. There it was again, that inconvenient question, turned back on him. "Wendell will need a man on the remuda. when the cattle start moving," he said. "I want him to give it to me." Drusilla did not praise him. She did not say he deserved it. She only asked, "How many horses? 6 now. More by April. The roan, too, if he learns to quit arguing with iron. What happens if you get the work, I'll be gone. Stretches at a time. Better pay, better responsibility. And you want it." Brant met her eyes. Yes. He felt almost foolish after saying it. Yet the words sat cleanly between them. The door opened before either could add more. Wendell stepped in again, a folded note in his hand. "Upper Camp changed the number," he said. "I need 10 coats in 9 days. I'll pay extra if you can manage it." Then he looked at Brant. Keller make the extra runs for cloth and finished coats. Brant saw the price of that arrangement before Wendell finished speaking. Edward's place was no next-door errand in winter footing. Extra rides would take the mornings he had been giving the young horses, and the roan would stand, while the chance he wanted most slipped away. Worse, saying yes would turn the one favor Drusilla had asked of him into a week of duties neither of them had chosen. He looked at her. She did not ask him to take the work. "I can carry what's ready on my regular day," Brant said. "No extra runs." Wendell's brow furrowed. "There's money in it." "I know." Brant held his voice level. "My mornings belong to the horses." The room went quiet. Wendell turned to Drusilla. "Can you make 10 without him? No?" She did not rush the answer. "I can make 6 well. Your feed wagon can collect them. I need 10. Then 4 will have to come from us somewhere else." Olive had come to the kitchen doorway. Brant saw the concern gather in her face, but Drusilla kept her eyes on Wendell. At last he nodded once. 6. That was all. When he had gone, Olive sighed. That was a good deal of money to let out the door. Drusilla folded the lining once carefully. "I know." She did not apologize. Brant stood with the rope still in his hand. He had expected some sign that she regretted his refusal. A colder glance, a clipped word, nothing came. She looked at him instead and said, "You'll miss your light if you don't leave now." Relief moved through him so sharply he nearly laughed. He tipped his hat. "Yes, ma'am. Don't start. Wasn't planning to." He left before he spoiled the moment by proving otherwise. For the next several days, the question stayed with him after the order itself had been settled, whether 2 people could want each other without turning every useful hour into proof. He had known men who courted by making themselves unavoidable. They arrived with repairs no one had asked for, decisions already made, and plans that left a woman only the choice of accepting gracefully or looking ungrateful. Brant never thought much about it until Drusilla. He also knew the other sort of foolishness, the man who stood so far back in the name of good manners that he never risked asking for anything at all. That one was closer to home. On Tuesday, he came into the post with a spool of heavy waxed thread Wendell had asked him to carry to a ranch south of the road. Drusilla saw it in his hand. "Where is that going, Pacheco place?" "When after I leave here?" She held out her hand. Brant gave her the spool. "The Edwards wagon comes tomorrow," she said. "They're stopping there on the way back. It can go with them. I'm already mounted. And you said the roan needs work before the ground softens." Brant looked at her. She set the spool beside the finished coats. "Go work your horses." It was such a simple sentence that it unsettled him more than praise would have. He had spent years being the man who could take one more task because he was capable of it. Nobody had ever made much ceremony over protecting his time from a favor he had volunteered himself. Drusilla was not paying him back. She was not keeping a tally. She wanted something for him. "How did he take the bit yesterday?" she asked. "The roan. You only have 1 horse you complain about every week." Brant leaned a hip against the counter. Before he remembered, he had just been ordered out of the building. He took it fine, then decided standing still was an insult to his family. Drusilla's eyes warmed. Sounds familiar. He studied her. That was nearly a joke. Go before I improve at it. He smiled all the way to the door. Outside he mounted and rode west toward the ranch instead of south. For the first time since wanting the Remuda job had begun to matter, the work did not feel like something he had to defend from the woman he wanted. She had made room for it herself. That Sunday he called as promised. He brought nothing. No parcel, no spool, no excuse. Drusilla noticed. You came empty-handed. I was told that was allowed. Olive was in the kitchen, and the post had gone quiet after the afternoon stage. Brant and Drusilla sat at the end of the common table with 2 cups of coffee between them. They talked about the 6 coats, then stopped talking about work. He told her about a bay mare he had ridden as a boy that could open a poorly latched gate with her nose. Drusilla told him Olive once tried to teach her to make biscuits and had finally banned her from touching the dough after 3 attempts that came out fit for doorstops. Brant looked toward the kitchen. Your aunt. No, you tell that story. She tells it better. Olive called from the other room and louder. Drusilla covered her face for a second, laughing. Brant thought he could get used to that sound. The thought came without warning and stayed. The following week gave them less time. Drusilla finished the 6 coats. The Edwards wagon collected them on its regular feed run. Olive and Drusilla settled into a rhythm that was not perfect, but was workable. The post still had busy days, and Drusilla still helped beyond her promised hours sometimes, but Brant saw her choose it now rather than slide into it without notice. He saw other changes, too. She no longer stiffened when he entered the workroom doorway because he never crossed it until she looked up or spoke. Once, when he started to reach past her for his hat on a peg, he stopped and said, "Behind you?" Drusilla stepped aside before he moved. It cost him nothing. It seemed to cost her less each time. He did not mistake that for a cure. He had no business measuring such a thing. He only knew the room between them no longer felt full of unseen snares. Wendell came by near the end of February to inspect 2 of the young horses and said almost nothing afterward. That was his way. Brant took the animals back to the ranch without asking what it meant. For 3 days he had no reason to visit Cottonwood. The first day was work. The second day was longer work. By the third, he discovered that wanting to see Drusilla had nothing to do with whether she needed anything from him. That was less comfortable than usefulness and far more honest. When his route finally brought him back, she was in the side room with 1 table moved inside and another still in the common room. The small iron stove rattled when the wind pushed at the pipe. She looked up from arranging folded cloth. "You're late." "Cattle don't consult your clock. I didn't say I was waiting." "No." He took off his hat. "You didn't have to." The words came out before he could judge them. Drusilla's face changed. Not startled exactly. More as if she had heard the seriousness under a plain sentence. Brant could have covered it with humor. He did not. "I missed coming here," he said. Her hands became still on the folded wool. Then she nodded once. "I missed you coming." Nothing in the room moved for a moment except the stove flame behind its little iron door. Brant felt the old urge to make himself useful. Fix the rattling pipe, move the second table, find something with weight he could lift. Instead, he stayed where he was. Drusilla picked up the folded wool again. "Sunday," she said. "I'll be here." The warmest evening of the winter came 2 days later, though snow still lay under the porch and neither of their spring plans was certain. No stage was due after dark. The 6-coat money had put Drusilla close enough to the side room rent that Olive had let her begin using it, but the room was not yet fully hers. Wendell had not named the Remuda man. Brant still had horses to prove, and Drusilla still had orders to win. When he came to the doorway after supper, he knocked on the frame. Drusilla was inside. She had placed a second chair beside her own near the stove. "Come in," she said. He stepped over the threshold and shut the door only as far as she indicated, leaving it open a hand's width to the common room. The two chairs faced the stove at a slight angle. There was no work on her lap. Brant sat and rested his hat on one knee. For several minutes they listened to the wind scrape lightly at the building. He could hear Olive moving dishes in the kitchen beyond the wall. Drusilla looked at him. "You have something to say." "Do I? You're holding your hat like it owes you money." Brant looked down at his hands. She was right. He loosened his grip. "I want to court you, Drusilla." The words sounded better spoken than carried around. He continued before caution could dress them in less honest clothes. "Properly? I want my Sundays here when the work allows it. I want to come because I'm coming to see you, not because Wendell needs a parcel carried." Drusilla held his gaze. Brant's chest tightened, but he did not rush to fill the silence. "There's another part," he said. "If Wendell gives me the remuda, I'll be gone for stretches when the cattle move. I won't give that work up to prove I mean this." Her brows lifted slightly. "And I won't ask you to give up this room," he added. "Or your orders. I don't want a courtship built out of one of us making less of a life so the other can feel sure." Drusilla looked toward the small table, then back to him. "I don't want you to give up the horses." Brant let out a breath he had not meant to hold. "But if you tell me you'll come on a Sunday," she said, "I want you to come. If weather or work stops, you send word with somebody who is actually coming this way. I won't spend the day wondering because you thought silence was easier. There it was not a plea, not an accusation, a condition he could understand. I can do that. And when you are here, I don't want you finding errands just to earn the chair." Brant glanced at it. "That may be harder." A smile touched her mouth. "I'll learn." Drusilla shifted her hand on the chair between them. Then she turned it palm up on the worn wood, leaving the last inch of distance to him. Brant looked at her hand. He did not take it until she gave the smallest nod. His fingers closed around hers, warm and careful, without being timid. No thunder answered. No stage arrived. Nothing outside the room knew that the whole shape of his spring had just changed. Brant sat beside her and understood with a clarity that made him almost laugh at himself, that he no longer wanted to be merely the man she could trust to stop. He wanted to be the man she expected to return. Several weeks later, the thaw darkened the road and turned the stable yard to brown mud by afternoon. Snow still clung to the north side of the outbuildings, but water ran from the eaves in steady drops. Drusilla had paid Olive for the side room through the next month. A small board by the window carried her name in dark letters: Drusilla Russell Coats and Mending. The sign did not make a ceremony of itself, but the road noticed. A freight driver who had bought coffee at the post for years stopped beneath it, read the name twice, and called to another man that Russell was the woman who had made Edwards's winter coats. Before his team pulled out, the second man stepped inside to ask Drusilla what she would charge to reline a coat before his next run. Brant heard her answer from the porch. Not Olive's price, not the post's price. Hers. Wendell had given Brant the remuda on trial for the first spring movement. Don't make me regret it had been the whole ceremony. Brant had answered, I'll try to preserve your delicate feelings. Wendell had thrown a glove at him. Now Brant was saddling before daylight for 4 days at the upper camp. The work was what he had wanted. He checked the cinch twice anyway, slower than necessary, because Drusilla had been busy with a morning stage and he had not yet seen her. He told himself he would not go looking through the post like a boy late for a dance. Then he heard boots in the mud. Drusilla came from the porch, carrying her brown wool coat over one arm. Brant straightened. She stopped in front of him. For 1 second, the yard seemed to hold both winters at once. The January snow, her shoulders drawn tight, his hands frozen in the air, and this morning, wet earth under their boots, his horse ready to leave her coat, resting openly across her arms. She held it out. Brant took it because she had put it in his hands. Drusilla turned one shoulder toward him. Then her body caught for a heartbeat. Her shoulders rose with the old, quick guard he remembered from January. Brant did not lift the coat. He did not move closer. He simply waited, the wool resting across his forearms, where she had placed it. Drusilla looked at his hands. She drew one slow breath. The tightness left her shoulders by degrees. Then she turned a little more toward him and gave the nod herself. Only then did Brant raise the coat. He settled the wool around her shoulders, drawing the collar higher against the morning cold. This time, when the fabric came around her, she leaned back just enough to help him bring the far side across. Her shoulder brushed his chest for the length of a breath. The old reflex had been there. So had the choice that followed it. Brant's hands dropped at once. Drusilla looked up at him. Her eyes were clear. "We have time for coffee," she said. "I ride in 10 minutes. Then we have 9. You become severe about schedules. You encourage me?" She led him to the porch, where 2 chairs sat against the wall out of the damp wind. One had been used often enough that its front legs had worn pale arcs into the boards. Brant sat beside her with a tin cup warming his hands. His horse stood tied near the stable saddle, packed for the upper camp. Drusilla's workroom window was behind them. In less than 10 minutes, both of them would go back to lives neither had surrendered. That was the part he loved. Not that she needed him to fasten a coat. Not that he could carry what was too heavy or ride where she could not. He loved that she had learned to ask for the exact thing she wanted, and that she had made room to want him too. He loved that she expected him to keep his own road and still return on purpose. When the cup was half empty, Drusilla looked toward his horse. "You'll send word if the creek rises, I will. And Sunday, if I can cross, I'll be here. If you can't, I'll send somebody who can." She nodded, satisfied. Brant looked at the chair beneath him, then at the road beyond the yard, dark with thaw. At the beginning of winter, the best thing he had done for Drusilla was step aside and let her leave. By spring, the better thing was knowing she could leave whenever she wished, and had chosen to keep a chair for him anyway. What better proof of a home did 2 people need than a chair kept ready and a road neither one was asked to surrender?